A crying child stood alone in a busy square. A stranger knelt down, whispering soft Italian words. Nearby, a notorious crime boss froze completely. Recognizing that exact lullaby, he turned to his men and ordered, "Find everything about her." Unknowingly, she had just walked into a dangerous, dark world. New York City was a symphony of blaring sirens, overlapping chatter, and hurried footsteps. For 27-year-old Madeline Brooks, the chaos was a comforting white noise. As a pediatric speech pathologist working in a demanding Manhattan clinic, she spent her days untangling the complex webs of childhood trauma and developmental delays. She was observant, patient, and carried a quiet strength inherited from her maternal grandmother, Rosa. It was a brisk Tuesday afternoon when Madeline decided to take her lunch break in a crowded plaza near Columbus Circle. She had just purchased a bitter espresso, leaning against a stone balustrade, when a piercing shriek cut through the ambient city noise. It wasn't a standard childhood tantrum. It was a sound of sheer, unadulterated panic. Madeline's professional instincts kicked in immediately. She scanned the sea of moving bodies and spotted the source. A small boy, perhaps 5 years old, wearing an expensive tailored miniature suit that looked entirely out of place on a playground. He was backed against a wrought-iron fence, violently sobbing, swatting away the hands of a well-meaning but overwhelmed female security guard. "Hey, buddy, where are your parents?" the guard kept asking, her voice loud and stressed, which only terrified the boy further. Madeline pushed through the crowd. "Excuse me," she said softly but firmly, flashing her clinic ID to the guard. "I work with children. Let me try." The guard stepped back, looking relieved. Madeline slowly crouched down, keeping her distance so as not to crowd the boy. She noticed his trembling hands, the tear-stained silk of his collar, and the frantic way his dark eyes darted around. "Hi," Madeline said gently in English. The boy squeezed his eyes shut and let out a rapid, breathless string of words. "Voglio mio zio, non mi toccare! Lasciami!" Italian. Madeline blinked, surprised, but it wasn't just standard Italian. It was heavily accented, wrapped in the specific melodic cadence of the Campanian dialect. It was the exact dialect her grandmother Rosa had spoken in their cramped Brooklyn kitchen when Madeleine was a little girl. Without missing a beat, Madeleine dropped her voice to a soothing, rhythmic register. "Va bene, tesoro. Nessuno ti farà del male," she murmured softly. "It's okay, sweetheart. No one will hurt you." The boy's eyes snapped open. He stared at her, his chest heaving, shocked to hear his native tongue from a stranger in this massive, frightening city. "Dove sta il tuo zio?" Madeline asked, her tone incredibly gentle. "Where is your uncle?" "L'ho perso," the boy choked out, a fresh wave of tears spilling over his cheeks. "I lost him." Madeline slowly extended one hand, palm up, keeping her posture non-threatening. She didn't touch him. Instead, she began to hum. It was a reflexive action, reaching for a tool she used when words failed. She hummed a very specific, ancient folk lullaby her grandmother used to sing, a song about a little bird finding its way back to a lemon grove in the rain. As she hummed, she quietly sang the lyrics. "Vola piccolo pettirosso, la pioggia non può bagnare le tue ali." The effect was instantaneous. The boy stopped crying. His breathing hitched, and he took a hesitant step forward, grabbing onto Madeline's outstretched hand like it was a lifeline. He buried his face into her shoulder, and she wrapped her arms around him, swaying slightly, continuing the song. What Madeline didn't know was that a block away, a frantic search was tearing the plaza apart. Vincenzo Romano, a man whose name struck terror into the hearts of every major crime syndicate on the eastern seaboard, was experiencing a rare moment of absolute, blinding panic. His nephew, Leo, had slipped away from his detail during a brief, violent altercation with a rival scout in a nearby alley. Vincenzo's men were scouring the streets, overturning vendor carts and intimidating pedestrians. Vincenzo practically tore through the plaza, his dark overcoat billowing, his jaw set in a lethal line. He was flanked by his underboss, Matteo, and 3 heavily armed associates. Then, Vincenzo saw him, Leo. But Vincenzo didn't rush forward. He stopped dead in his tracks, his polished leather shoes grinding to a halt against the pavement. The blood drained from his face. Matteo bumped into him. "Boss? We got him. He's right." Vincenzo held up a single, trembling hand, silencing his second-in-command. He wasn't just looking at his nephew. He was staring at the woman holding him. More specifically, he was listening to her. Over the din of the New York traffic, Vincenzo heard the faint, melodic words of the lullaby. La pioggia non può bagnare le tue ali. Vincenzo's heart hammered a violent rhythm against his ribs. It was impossible. That song was not a common Italian nursery rhyme. It was a deeply personal family song, a heavily guarded piece of Romano history originating from a tiny, secluded mountain village that had been burned to the ground decades ago. Only his mother had ever sung that song. His mother and her long-lost sister, who was presumed dead for over 30 years. He watched the young woman, her soft brown hair falling over her shoulders, her expression filled with profound empathy as she rocked his nephew. "Boss, should I get the kid?" Matteo asked, sensing the dangerous shift in Vincenzo's demeanor. Before Matteo could move, a pair of uniformed NYPD officers approached Madeline, having been flagged down by the security guard. Madeline spoke to them, pointing toward the street, and gently handed Leo over to the officers, kissing the top of the boy's head. Knowing her job was done, and wanting to avoid a lengthy police report that would make her late for her afternoon sessions, Madeline smiled at the boy, turned, and seamlessly disappeared into the thick crowd heading toward the subway. Vincenzo exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. He watched her vanish. He didn't chase her. A man in his position didn't chase ghosts in broad daylight. He hunted them in the dark. He stepped out of the shadows, immediately flanked by the police, who recognized him, not as a mob boss, but as the wealthy, connected CEO of Romano Logistics. He scooped Leo into his arms, kissing the boy's cheek fiercely, while handing a massive stack of cash to the bewildered officers for their trouble. As they climbed into the back of a waiting armored SUV, Vincenzo looked out the tinted window at the subway entrance, where the woman had vanished. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold calculation hiding a burning, obsessive curiosity. He turned his head slowly to look at Matteo. "The woman who was holding Leo," Vincenzo said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sent a shiver down his underboss's spine. "Find everything about her. Where she works, where she sleeps, who her parents are. I want a file on my desk by midnight." "Understood," Matteo nodded. "Who do you think she is?" Vincenzo looked back out the window, his jaw clenching. "I think she's a ghost, and I'm going to find out why she's haunting me." By 11:45 p.m. that night, Vincenzo Romano was sitting behind the massive mahogany desk in his heavily fortified Long Island estate. The room was dark, illuminated only by the amber glow of a desk lamp and the low fire crackling in the hearth. Matteo stepped into the room, respectfully placing a thick manila folder on the desk. "She wasn't trying to hide," Matteo reported, keeping his hands clasped behind his back. "She bought a coffee at a nearby cart with a credit card right before the incident. Facial recognition from the plaza cameras matched her ID in seconds. Her name is Madeline Brooks." Vincenzo flipped the folder open. A high-resolution photo of Madeline stared back at him. She had kind, intelligent eyes, and a warm, genuine smile. Age 27, Matteo continued, reciting the facts from memory. Born in Brooklyn, works as a pediatric speech pathologist at the Hudson Institute. Clean record. Not even a parking ticket. She lives alone in a modest apartment in Park Slope. Her father was an American accountant, passed away 5 years ago. Her mother? Matteo hesitated. Vincenzo's eyes snapped up. What about the mother? Her mother died in childbirth, Matteo said. Madeline was raised primarily by her grandmother on her mother's side, an Italian immigrant named Rosa. Vincenzo's fingers tightened around the edge of the folder, the cardstock creasing under his grip. Rosa. The name hit him like a physical blow. Rosa was the name of his mother's younger sister. The sister who had supposedly drowned in the Mediterranean in 1993 after betraying their father, the former Don of the Romano family. If this Rosa was that Rosa, it meant his aunt had survived, fled to America, and raised a family in the very city the Romanos controlled, right under their noses. And it meant the innocent speech pathologist in the photograph was his first cousin, or, depending on the bloodlines and the old family grudges, a severe liability. Does she have any connections to our world? Vincenzo asked, his voice deathly quiet. Any ties to the Luccheses, the Colombians? None, Matteo confirmed. We ran her financials, her communications, her social circles. She's exactly what she looks like, a civilian. She spends her weekends at farmers' markets and reading in parks. She doesn't know who you are, boss. She doesn't know what she stumbled into. Vincenzo leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. The Mafia was built on paranoia and blood. If the old guard of his family, his vicious, traditionalist uncles in Naples, found out that Rosa's bloodline had survived, they would demand Madeline's head to settle the old vendetta. They wouldn't care that she was an innocent American girl. I need to see her, Vincenzo declared, making a sudden decision. Boss, if she's a civilian, we can just monitor her. Leave her be, Matteo suggested carefully. If you bring her into our orbit, it gets messy. She sang the Petirosso lullaby, Matteo, Vincenzo growled, standing up, his towering frame casting a long, imposing shadow across the room. She sang it perfectly. If anyone else in our syndicate hears her sing that, or recognizes her face, she has the Romano eyes. She is dead. I need to know exactly what she knows. I need to know if she's a threat, or if she needs to be protected. How do you want to play it? We can pick her up quietly, bring her to the warehouse. No, Vincenzo snapped, the mere thought of treating her like a common enemy sparking an irrational anger in his chest. We do this legitimately. She's a pediatric speech therapist. Leo hasn't spoken a word of English since the incident in the alley today. He's regressed. Matteo nodded slowly, catching on. You want to hire her? Contact the Hudson Institute tomorrow morning, Vincenzo ordered. Use the Shell Corporation, Vanguard Holdings. Tell them the CEO requires an elite, private, in-home therapist for his traumatized nephew. Offer them triple her current salary to buy out her contract. Make it an offer the clinic director cannot legally refuse. And if she refuses? Vincenzo's eyes darkened, reflecting the firelight. She won't. I'll make sure of it. 3 days later, Madeline Brooks found herself sitting in the back of a sleek, black town car, winding through the heavily wooded private roads of Long Island's North Shore. She felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Her clinic director had practically pushed her out the door. The offer from Vanguard Holdings was astronomical, enough money to fund the clinic's low-income outreach program for a decade. The only condition was that Madeline become the exclusive, full-time therapist for the CEO's nephew, residing at the estate during the week. The car pulled up to massive, wrought-iron gates that swung open silently, revealing a sprawling, stone mansion that looked more like a modern fortress. Heavily muscled men in dark suits patrolled the perimeter with imposing dogs. Madeleine swallowed hard. This didn't feel like a corporate CEO's home. It felt like a compound. She was escorted inside by a polite but stoic man named Dante, who led her into a breathtaking, sunlit conservatory overlooking the ocean. "Mr. Romano will be with you shortly," Dante said, bowing his head slightly before retreating and closing the heavy oak doors behind him. Madeleine paced the room, admiring the rare orchids, when the doors clicked open again. She turned, a polite, professional smile ready on her face. "Mr. Romano, thank you for—" The words died in her throat. Standing in the doorway was the man from the plaza. Without his heavy overcoat, dressed in a sharp, tailored slate-grey suit, he was terrifyingly handsome and radiated an aura of absolute authority and danger. His dark, piercing eyes locked onto hers, pinning her in place. "Miss Brooks," Vincenzo said smoothly, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to vibrate in the large room. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them with predatory grace. "I am Vincenzo Romano. Welcome to my home." Madeleine felt her heart kick into overdrive. She remembered the sheer panic of the men searching the plaza. She remembered the way the police had deferred to him. You're the uncle. From the park." "I am," Vincenzo agreed, his gaze sweeping over her face, searching for any sign of deception. "You saved my nephew, Leo, from a very traumatic situation. I owe you a debt of gratitude." "I was just doing my job," Madeleine said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands were trembling slightly. She crossed her arms, a defensive posture. "But I have to admit, Mr. Romano, this feels highly unorthodox. Why use a corporate shell company to hire me? Why not just call the clinic directly?" Vincenzo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Men in my position value privacy above all else, Madeleine. May I call you Madeleine?" "Miss Brooks is fine," she replied, raising her chin. She wasn't going to be intimidated, even if every instinct in her body was screaming that this man was dangerous. Vincenzo's respect for her ticked upward. "Miss Brooks, Leo has refused to speak to anyone since Tuesday. He is terrified, but he remembers you. He remembers the song you sang to him." Vincenzo took another step closer. The air between them felt incredibly dense, charged with an unspoken tension. "Tell me, Miss Brooks," Vincenzo murmured, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into flawless, regional Italian. "Where did an American girl learn the song of the Peterosso?" Madeleine's breath hitched. She stared into his dark eyes, realizing suddenly that they shared the exact same unusual shade of hazel green. "My grandmother taught it to me," she answered slowly, defensively, staying in English. "Why does it matter?" "Because," Vincenzo stepped so close she could smell his expensive cologne, cedar and smoke. "That song is a Romano family secret, and I need to know exactly who your grandmother was before I let you walk out of this room." "My grandmother's name was Rosa Bianchi," Madeleine said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, sunlit conservatory. She kept her chin high, refusing to wither under Vincenzo's intense, predatory gaze. "She was born near Naples, but she rarely spoke of it. She told me she fled Italy in the early 90s because of a blood feud. She came to Brooklyn, married an American, and scrubbed her past clean." Vincenzo's posture rigidified. The name Bianchi was the final puzzle piece, locking into place with a resounding, chilling click. Rosa wasn't his biological aunt. She was the orphaned daughter of his grandfather's most trusted consigliere. Raised alongside Vincenzo's mother in the main estate, they had been as close as blood sisters, sharing everything, including the heavily guarded family lullabies. When the rival Falcone family massacred half the Romano leadership in the winter of 1993, Rosa was presumed dead in the crossfire. She wasn't a blood relative, but she was a Romano in every way that mattered, Vincenzo murmured, the harsh edge of his voice softening by a fraction of a degree. He stepped back, giving Madeleine space to breathe. She survived, and she kept you hidden. Hidden from what? Madeleine demanded, her frustration momentarily overriding her fear. Mr. Romano, I am a pediatric therapist from Park Slope. I don't know anything about blood feuds or syndicates. I just want to help the little boy who was crying in the plaza. Vincenzo studied her. In his world, innocence was a liability, a weakness to be exploited by rival families. But looking at Madeleine, at her fierce, protective defiance, he saw something else entirely. He saw a sanctuary. You are hidden no longer, Miss Brooks, Vincenzo said quietly. By stepping into that plaza and singing that song, you exposed yourself to my world. The men I war with have eyes everywhere. If you go back to your apartment, you will be a target. The Falcone syndicate will use you to get to me, or worse, to get to Leo. Your only safe haven is here, at the Sands Point estate. Madeleine's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to call the police, to run, but the sheer gravity in Vincenzo's hazel-green eyes told her that standard laws no longer applied. So I'm a prisoner? You are under my absolute protection, Vincenzo corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will have a private wing. You will have whatever resources you require to treat Leo. But you cannot leave these gates without an armed escort. Do we have an understanding? Over the next 3 weeks, Madeleine's life transformed into a surreal blend of luxury and confinement. The Sands Point compound was breathtaking. Sprawling manicured gardens, cliffs overlooking the Long Island Sound, and a staff that anticipated her every need. Yet, the towering stone walls and the men carrying concealed weapons were a constant reminder of the golden cage she inhabited. She threw herself into her work with Leo. The trauma the 5-year-old had endured was profound. Madeleine utilized play-based articulation therapy, sitting on the floor of the Grand Library for hours, building block towers, and encouraging Leo to vocalize his choices. She used proprioceptive feedback techniques, gently guiding his jaw and lips when he struggled to form English syllables. And Vincenzo was always there. He was a phantom, lurking in the periphery. He would stand in the doorway of the library, his broad shoulders leaning against the oak frame, watching them in silence. Madeleine felt the weight of his gaze constantly. It was unnerving, yet, surprisingly, it wasn't threatening. There was a profound exhaustion behind Vincenzo's ruthless exterior, a heavy loneliness that only seemed to lift when he watched Madeleine draw a genuine laugh from his nephew. Late one evening, after Leo had finally fallen asleep, Madeleine was in the massive chef's kitchen, brewing a cup of chamomile tea. The room was dark, save for the under-cabinet lighting. He spoke a full sentence today. A deep voice rumbled from the shadows. Madeleine gasped, nearly dropping her mug. Vincenzo stepped into the light, having discarded his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, making him look less like a Mafia don and more like a weary, incredibly striking man. "He did," Madeleine smiled, her guard dropping slightly. "He asked for the blue blocks instead of the red ones. It's a massive breakthrough." Vincenzo walked over to the marble island, stopping just feet from her. The proximity sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. "You possess a rare gift, Madeleine. You bring light into rooms that have been dark for a very long time." It's just patience, she whispered, acutely aware of how close he was, of the scent of cedar and rain clinging to his skin. Vincenzo reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. The touch was achingly tender, a stark contrast to the violence she knew he was capable of. It is far more than patience. It is grace. Before Madeleine could decipher the heavy, burning emotion in his eyes, the heavy oak doors of the kitchen burst open. Matteo stood there, out of breath, his face pale. "Boss," Matteo said urgently, ignoring Madeleine's presence. "We have a massive problem. The Falcones. They didn't just track the scout from the plaza. They breached the clinic's servers before Vanguard Holdings scrubbed the files." Vincenzo's hand dropped from Madeleine's face. The tender man vanished instantly, replaced by the lethal apex predator. "What do they know?" "They know who she is," Matteo grimaced. "And they know her grandmother was Rosa Bianchi. Dominic Falcone just sent a message to the warehouse. He considers the Bianchi bloodline unpaid collateral from 1993. Vincenzo's jaw locked. He turned back to Madeleine, his eyes as cold as absolute zero. The war hadn't just arrived at their doorstep. It had targeted the only light left in his life. The assault came exactly 48 hours later, tearing through the quiet afternoon. Madeleine had been allowed a heavily guarded trip to Mount Sinai Hospital to retrieve specialized auditory equipment for Leo's therapy. She was in the back of a bulletproof Escalade with Matteo when the trap was sprung on the Queensboro Bridge. A transport truck swerved violently across traffic, jackknifing directly into their path. The Escalade slammed into the steel barriers in a shower of sparks. "Get down!" Matteo roared, drawing his weapon as the deafening crack of automatic gunfire erupted outside. The Falcone hitmen swarmed the stalled vehicle. Madeleine hit the floorboards, squeezing her eyes shut as the reinforced glass began to spiderweb. The terrifying reality of Vincenzo's world was finally crashing down upon her. She thought of Leo. She thought of Vincenzo. She was going to die on this bridge, a casualty of a 30-year-old vendetta. Suddenly, the staccato rhythm of enemy gunfire was drowned out by the roar of high-performance engines. Through the fractured glass, Madeleine witnessed absolute carnage. Vincenzo Romano had arrived. He was not a man who commanded from the rear. Dressed in a dark suit, his face a mask of unyielding fury, he dispatched the Falcone men with terrifying, lethal precision. Within minutes, the bridge was eerily silent. The rear door of the Escalade was wrenched open. Vincenzo stood there, his chest heaving, blood splattered across his collar. He dropped his weapon, falling to his knees on the asphalt, and pulled her roughly into his chest. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his hands frantically framing her face. "Madeleine, look at me." "No," she sobbed, clinging to his lapels. "I'm okay." "Vincenzo, I'm okay." Hearing his first name on her lips seemed to break the last remaining barrier within him. He crushed her against him. "I will burn their entire empire to the ground for touching you," he vowed, his voice a dark, gravelly promise. 3 days later, the underworld of New York was unrecognizable. The Romano Syndicate, unleashed by a wrathful Vincenzo, had systematically dismantled the Falcone leadership. The blood debt was paid in full. Back at the Sands Point estate, Madeleine sat on the stone terrace overlooking the ocean, a thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The heavy glass door slid open, and Vincenzo stepped out into the crisp evening air. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes a testament to sleepless nights of violence. He sat beside her, placing a thick manila envelope on the stone bench between them. "It's over," he said quietly. "Dominic Falcone is gone. Matteo has prepared a new identity for you. A new passport, untouched bank accounts, a home on the West Coast. Complete freedom. Madeleine stared at the envelope. It was her logical, sane exit. And what about Leo? I will find him the best therapists in the world, Vincenzo replied, his jaw clenched. And what about you? Vincenzo finally locked his hazel eyes onto hers. The raw vulnerability in his gaze was staggering. I am a monster, Madeleine. You saw what I am. You are light and everything good in this world. If I keep you here, my darkness will eventually consume you. Madeleine reached out, her warm hand covering his rough one. She didn't flinch. When I found Leo in that plaza, he was lost in the dark. I didn't run away, Vincenzo. I learned how to guide him through it. She picked up the envelope containing her perfect escape and deliberately ripped it in half. I'm not afraid of the dark, she whispered, leaning closer to the scent of cedar and smoke. And I'm not leaving you to face it alone. Vincenzo exhaled a ragged breath, cupping her face and pulling her in for a kiss. It was a kiss of desperate need, of a violent world finding its singular, peaceful center. In the heart of the Mafia's darkest empire, the lost lullaby had finally brought them both home. If you were captivated by this intense journey of loyalty, dangerous love, and unbreakable family secrets, don't keep this story to yourself. Hit that like button to support the channel, share this video with fellow romance and drama lovers, and subscribe so you never miss another thrilling, real-life inspired tale. Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed with Vincenzo?